She said it softly, almost like a joke, the kind people say when they're nervous about wanting something too much, her fingers hovering over the velvet cushion as the diamond ring caught the café light and fractured it into 1,000 quiet sparks. "Let me see the ring, it might fit me," and the words settled between us heavier than either of us expected. Because that ring wasn't supposed to be on the table between half-finished coffee cups and a plate of melting pastries, it was supposed to be hidden, buried in a drawer, waiting for a moment that had already failed once, but there it was, exposed, vulnerable, like both of us, and when I replied, "Perhaps it was meant for you," I surprised not only her but myself, because moments earlier she had been a stranger I met by accident on a rainy afternoon when my phone died and the city felt too loud and too empty at the same time, and now the air felt charged, like the universe had leaned in closer to listen. Her name was Lena, she told me. That between shy smiles and careful pauses, a woman who laughed with her eyes before her mouth caught up, someone who carried heartbreak like a scar she didn't explain but never tried to hide, and as she slipped the ring onto her finger, slowly, hesitantly, it fit perfectly, not loose, not tight, as if the metal had been waiting, and for a moment neither of us breathed. Because we both knew how ridiculous and dangerous it was to let meaning bloom so fast, but some moments don't ask permission. They just happen. The ring had been bought 2 years earlier for a woman who loved certainty and plans and timelines, a woman who left when life bent instead of breaking cleanly, when my business failed, when my father got sick, when the future stopped looking like a straight line and started looking like a maze. And I had kept the ring not because I believed she'd come back, but because throwing it away felt like erasing a version of myself that had once believed love was guaranteed if you followed the rules. And Lena, she didn't know any of that yet. She just stood there turning her hand, watching the light dance, whispering, "It's strange how something can feel familiar even when it's new," and that was when I noticed the tremble in her voice, the way brave people sound when they're tired of being brave, and we talked then, not in the shallow way people do on first meetings, but deeply, honestly, about lost chances and wrong timings and how loneliness doesn't always scream, sometimes it just sits quietly beside you. And as the rain tapped against the window and the café slowly emptied, I realized this wasn't about the ring at all. It was about recognition, about two people seeing each other clearly at a moment when neither of them was pretending anymore. She told me about her engagement that never became a marriage, about how she gave back her ring the same night she found out love alone couldn't fix betrayal, about how she promised herself she'd never try on another ring. Unless it felt different, unless it felt safe, and the word safe echoed inside me because I didn't feel strong or successful or impressive anymore, but with her, I felt honest, and honesty, I was learning, is its own kind of safety. When she finally slid the ring off and placed it back on the cushion, her fingers lingered, and she laughed softly, embarrassed, saying, "I don't even know why I asked." And I wanted to tell her that sometimes the heart recognizes home before the mind understands the map. But instead I just said, "Some things ask us," and when we stood to leave, neither of us rushed, like we were both afraid that stepping outside would break the spell, and before we parted she looked at me with a seriousness that cut through the softness and said, "If this is just a story we tell strangers, I'm okay with that, but if it's more, don't promise anything you can't live up to." And I nodded, because promises made lightly are the ones that hurt the most, and as she walked away into the rain, I realized something unsettling and beautiful at the same time. I didn't feel like I was losing her, I felt like I had just been found, and if you're listening to this story right now, feeling that quiet pull in your chest, that sense that maybe love doesn't always arrive the way movies tell us it will, then you already understand why some stories deserve to be followed all the way through. So before the next chapter unfolds, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because what happens after that ring finds its true place will remind you that fate doesn't rush, but it never forgets either. I didn't expect to see her again so soon, and I definitely didn't expect to see her standing outside my apartment building 3 nights later, rain-soaked again like the universe hadn't finished with us yet, her arms folded tightly around herself not for warmth but for courage, and when I opened the door she didn't smile this time. She just said my name the way people do when they've already made a decision but are terrified of what it might cost them, and before I could ask anything she stepped inside and handed me something wrapped in a napkin, unfolding it slowly to reveal the ring, my ring, but not quite mine anymore, because she had worn it, even briefly, and that changes things, and she said, "I can't stop thinking about it, about you, about why it fit." And those words cracked open everything I'd been holding together since the cafe, because the truth is I couldn't stop thinking either, about how silence can feel louder than conversation, about how some connections don't fade when you walk away, they sharpen, and we sat there across from each other in the dim light, two people pretending to be calm while their lives quietly rearranged themselves, and that's when the past finally caught up to us, because my ex called, her name lighting up my phone like a ghost refusing to stay buried, and Lena saw it, saw my hesitation, saw the history in my eyes, and instead of asking questions she simply said, "You don't owe me anything, but don't lie to yourself," and I realized how rare that was, how powerful it is when someone gives you freedom instead of demands, so I answered the call, listened as a familiar voice spoke about regret and timing and second chances, and when I hung up, something inside me was finally clear, because the man I used to be would have clung to the past out of fear. But the man sitting in front of Lena understood that love isn't about who came first, it's about who stays when life stops being convenient, and I told her everything then, about the failed engagement, the nights I slept beside ambition instead of peace, the mistakes I made thinking stability was the same as happiness, and she listened without interrupting, tears forming not from sadness but recognition, and when I finished she stood up, walked toward me, and placed the ring back in my hand, closing my fingers around it, saying, "Then don't give it to who you were, give it to who you are now," and my chest tightened because suddenly the weight of that small circle of metal felt enormous, not because of marriage or promises or forever, but because it represented choice, and I asked her, quietly, honestly, without drama or spectacle, "Would you let me earn the right to put this on your finger someday?" And she didn't answer right away, because real answers take time. But when she finally nodded, it wasn't excitement that filled the room, it was peace, the kind that doesn't shout but settles, and we didn't rush anything after that, no sudden declarations, no fairy tale leap, just two people choosing presence over fantasy, and weeks passed filled with ordinary miracles, shared breakfasts, late-night talks, silences that felt comfortable instead of awkward, and one evening, months later, we returned to that same cafe, same table, same window, and I placed the ring between us again. But this time there was no hesitation in her smile, no trembling in her voice. When she said, "It fits," because she wasn't talking about her finger anymore, and when I slid it on, not as a promise of perfection but as a commitment to truth, the world didn't explode into applause, the rain didn't stop, nothing cinematic happened, except that everything finally felt aligned, and if you're listening to this story wondering whether love still finds people who've been broken, disappointed, or delayed, let this be your answer: yes, it does, but only when you're brave enough to let go of who you thought you were supposed to be. And if this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you that timing is not the enemy and that some rings don't symbolize ownership but belonging, then subscribe to this channel, because stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're reminders that your moment might be closer than you think.